Sports, news, smack, Rome. Only on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back to Rome. My guest tonight is an 11-time Emmy Award-winning journalist. He is currently the chief investigative correspondent for CBS News. I'm joined by Armen Keteyian. Armen, great to have you on. How are you?
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
All right, you're right there in the middle of things, so let me get your thoughts first on Mark Emmert and the NCAA. Do you think that he and they got it right, and does the punishment fit the crime?
I think they absolutely got it right here. This was a very, very unusual case. As Mark Emmert said today, this is historically unprecedented in the history of the NCAA. These kinds of crimes, sex abuse crimes, you have that, and then you have this cover-up at the highest levels of the university. So this is an extraordinary case. This is not any sort of normal kind of violations or infractions case whatsoever. I think what happened here is the Louis Freeh report and the criminal investigation, but mainly the Freeh report, those 267 very damning pages. The NCAA saw that. They put a lot of credibility into it, and they devised a series of sanctions. While they're not the death penalty, they in effect act as the death penalty in many ways to Penn State.
Armen, what happened to the normal NCAA investigative process? I mean, certainly this did not go the way it normally does. Did Penn State not deserve more?
I don't think Penn State deserved more in this case. I think Penn State got exactly what it deserved. You have a cover-up that began, really, you could start in 1998, but certainly in 2001, when Mike McQueary first brought these horrific allegations to Joe Paterno's attention. If you look at that Freeh report and not only the emails, but the documentation, the notes on people's papers, I mean, it's clear that Penn State repeatedly attempted to conceal these allegations from child welfare authorities. So it's outside the mainstream of what would be a normal infractions case. And I think Mark Emmert today made that very, very clear. This is not the Pandora's box. We're not opening up anything unusual here long term. This is a very unusual situation, a horrific crime that was covered up by a university. And what they're saying now is that they are going to break down this culture, essentially with 100-pound sledgehammers with these violations, and they're going to allow Penn State over the next 4 or 5 years to attempt to rebuild a culture that doesn't put football first.
I mean, why do you think the school signed that letter of consent? I mean, for instance, did they accept the deal that was offered to them? Are they trying to make it right and move forward? Why was the school so willing to accept that letter of consent? Because there are trustee members that are not happy about it.
Well, sure, I'm sure there are, but first of all, they're the ones that commissioned the independent Freeh report. So when you go out and you spend multiples of millions of dollars on that report, it's a little hard to suddenly say, wait a second, we don't believe it, particularly when it's put together by the former director of the FBI. So that's number one. Number two is that they have a situation here where the public pressure, maybe not within the Penn State community, but from outside, certainly is weighing on the Penn State Board of Trustees now on this university to make things right. You didn't have to sit in that courtroom very long and listen to those young men talk about what happened to them as young boys with Jerry Sandusky to understand just how potentially awful this would be public relations-wise for this school if it lingered on much more than it already has.
Yeah, explain why the NCAA had jurisdiction in this case. Obviously, some people there are very upset about that and saying that it's not an NCAA issue. They should not have gotten involved. Why should they have been involved?
Well, I was there. I mean, Ed Ray today, who's the president of Oregon State University and who is the head of the executive committee, said, look, we not only have the right to do this by our bylaws and our Constitution, we have the responsibility to do this, to correct these egregious behavior on the part of one of our association members. So if we want to look at the fine print, and if somebody wants to point to bylaw X, Y, and Z, you had college presidents and college chancellors get together based on the recommendations by Mark Emmert and decide that they are allowed constitutionally to make this kind of these kinds of sanctions, these severe sanctions, in an unprecedented kind of case. They're not going to do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I think this is a once in a decade or once every other decade kind of case because, frankly, Jim, I mean, this is way beyond the pale as far as the world of sports is concerned. This is into the sex abuse crimes of the Catholic Church, cover up by corporations and governments. This is not a garden variety NCAA case by any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, finish that thought, Armen. In other words, this is not just merely the worst college scandal there ever was. In fact, that doesn't do it justice. It's much worse than that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been covering college sports for more than 25 years, dating back to Sports Illustrated, and I have never, ever experienced anything like I experienced in the courtroom and various times that I've been at this university. And it's a culture of silence. They talked about this today. This isn't an institutional cover-up of paying players or cash for cars or anything like this. This is an institutional cover-up of putting the brand and putting the university and putting the football team before young boys, before young men whose lives were destroyed by this. So I think in every case, in every way possible, that Penn State was subject to the kinds of sanctions that they received today.
And then finally, what is the mood like right now?
Well, it's mixed, to say the least. We were in the student union as the penalties were being announced, and people were crying. There were audible gasps. There's some anger. Certainly the football players here are, I think, in a very, very large state of flux, to say the least. You know, what's going to happen to them? They have the rights to transfer now without any sort of impunity. They can move to another school. Will they stick together? I don't know. I mean, when you look down into the future, or out into the future, and you see 4 years with no bowl games, no postseason play, and you're a freshman at this university, it's going to take a real strong will to stick around for those 4 years, I think.
Punitive and corrective is what they called it. Armen, really nice to have you on the show. I know it's a busy day for you. Thanks for making time for that.
My pleasure, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to get caught up.
Sports, news, smack, Rome. Only on CBS Sports Network.